This data visualizes a severe industry baseline. Across project management, 71% of projects fail due to poor planning and sequencing errors. When dependencies are identified late, rework scales by 3.4 times, resulting in an average cost overrun of 40 lakh rupees per project. We can see exactly how these numbers materialized by examining a recent case study, an 8 crore rupee core banking transformation for a mid-sized Indian bank. The project proceeded smoothly until exactly 6 weeks from the target launch date. Then the entire deployment derailed, forcing a complete operational reset. On paper, the project had absolutely everything going for it. The teams were fully resourced, the schedule was incredibly detailed, and everyone was compliant. But underneath that perfect timeline, the structural architecture collapsed entirely. Catastrophic project failures of this scale rarely happen because teams don't know what work needs to be done. They happen because teams misunderstand the exact logical order in which to execute it. The root cause traces back to standard industry training. Project managers routinely define a work breakdown structure and then immediately map it onto a calendar timeline. A work breakdown structure, or WBS, is a hierarchical tree of deliverables. It lists what you need to build, but it possesses zero sequencing intelligence. It is not a logical sequence of execution. When you push that list straight into a Gantt chart, you introduce immediate risk. A Gantt chart is a visualization of time. It is not a map of underlying logic. In a purely calendar-driven schedule, shifting a delayed task by 3 days will move a bar on your screen, but the chart will not warn you of the resulting downstream cascade if the rigorous mathematical precedence between those tasks hasn't been established. Planning a timeline strictly by calendar dates without mapping logical dependencies first provides zero protection against cascading delays. Looking at the Autopsy's pink failure section, user acceptance testing was aggressively scheduled before security penetration testing was complete. Further down, data migration was planned in parallel with database schema finalization, migrating live data into an undefined architecture, creating irreconcilable system conflicts. To prevent these conflicts, the schedule requires an architectural intervention using the precedence diagramming method, or PDM. This forces random tasks into a rigid, sequential network diagram. Activity owners identify precise predecessors and successors, locking in exact relationship pathways before scheduling begins. This process separates mandatory dependencies, fixed by physical or regulatory reality, from discretionary dependencies, which are strategic choices about workflow. Every finish-to-start relationship is audited. If a dependency is discretionary, it means there's room to compress the timeline. Forcing teams to build this logical map prior to assigning dates exposes the exact irreconcilable conflicts that polished timeline visuals naturally hide. After auditing the banking project, the dependency logic was sound, but the execution was still running 6 weeks behind target. The recovery relied on a specific schedule compression tool, lead time. A lag is a forced delay between 2 tasks. A lead allows a successor task to intentionally start before its predecessor finishes. The team analyzed the delayed security testing phase to identify where strict sequential steps could safely overlap. By applying a fast-tracking strategy, they created a 20 to 30% overlap between tasks that were previously scheduled back-to-back. Pulling successor tasks to the left reclaims timeline space mathematically. It shrinks the overall duration without reducing actual work volume or requiring extra budget. This single tactical adjustment in the testing phase recovered 19 days of dead time. You can only execute aggressive overlap if your dependency audit has explicitly proven which tasks are discretionary and which are mandatory. True schedule compression is an exercise in exploiting mathematical network logic. Calculating this logic requires reevaluating float or slack. Float is widely treated as harmless flexibility, but this is a dangerous misinterpretation. Free float belongs to a single activity. Total float belongs to the path, a shared budget distributed downstream. Consuming total float early depletes the buffer for everything that follows, instantly creating a brand new critical path out of thin air. Any sequence of tasks within 10% of the critical path duration is a near critical path. These are active, volatile threats that require constant monitoring. External dependencies, like regulatory approvals or third-party vendor deliveries, are completely uncontrollable variables that strike these near-critical paths directly. Because you cannot control an external vendor, their deliverables are schedule hostages. They require explicit, documented mitigation activities, not just empty lag buffers added to the timeline. The standard protocol is a dedicated external dependency register, tracking every outside variable with an assigned owner and a formal written recovery plan. Float is a finite budget of shared risk. Spending it without path-level awareness guarantees cascading timeline failures. Even with perfect logic, an overly detailed schedule destroys its own utility. We calibrate decomposition using the 880 rule. Any activity scheduled for under 8 hours requires excessive micromanagement to track. Any activity over 80 hours is too large to measure accurately and becomes an opaque black box. Breaking tasks down past this threshold creates thousands of granular network relationships, producing a diagram so noisy it loses all strategic value. The solution is the rolling wave approach, which replaces the theater of predicting 18 months of exact detail at kickoff. Through progressive elaboration, project managers define strict logical detail for the next 4 to 6 weeks, while maintaining high-level milestone placeholders for long-term execution. A rigorous schedule maps the flow of known information. It is a living document that adapts as details clarify over time. Looking back at the banking case study results, the green section outlines the impact of applying this exact sequence architecture. After the overhaul, the team recovered all 6 weeks of lost time. The platform launched with 0 critical defects, arriving within 3 days of the original target date. Across over 40 enterprise projects analyzed, strict logical sequencing yielded a 34% reduction in schedule variance and an 89% milestone hit rate. Milestone-gated releases tied to actual predecessor completion prove far more resilient than tasks dictated entirely by calendar dates. As this final execution warning points out, PMs must actively run critical path analysis, validate WBS deliverables against actual logic, and proactively hunt for lead opportunities. Scheduling from a visual calendar instead of a mapped logic network is a structural risk. It is only a matter of time before the missing logic catches up with your project.